What you have in front of you, if you did get the PowerPoint slides, and if you didn't, I'll print them for you at the end. But it's 4 slides per page, and so it's just everything that we have. If you want to take notes on that, you're welcome to. That's just for your personal use. These 2 handouts, if you are here as a homemaker lesson leader, this is going to be in the newsletter. This is just an interactive one that you can do with your club if you want. If you want either of those for your members, there's extras up here, and you can come take the number that you need. If you don't want them, you don't have to have that. But like I said, we did put this in our newsletter, so all of your members should have this anyway. This one they would not, and we have extras up here. If you want to do it as an interactive activity at your club, then you can. If you don't want to, that's fine, and I'm not going to make you take the pages and waste the paper. So that's why I've got them up here instead of just having them in packets already. But if you were lucky enough to be the leader several years ago when generational differences was the topic, you may have wondered why we did this again, and the answer is pretty simple, and that is because time has passed, right? And so not only do the things that we know about the generations that were already established have changed a little bit as they've aged, but we've added a couple of new generations. So the last time I presented this for homemakers, Gen Z was not yet in the workforce, and we didn't even know who Gen Alpha was. And so there are now 2 generations added to this. The irony of the times that we are in is that we didn't push anybody off the other side. And so a lot of times we tend to see, especially in the workforce, that as new generations enter, the older generations exit, and that is not happening right now. And so we have 6 generations that we're really going to talk about today. Actually 7, we'll mention a 7th. But there's a lot of new information because things have been kind of wild the last couple of years, and that has really changed people's outlook on several things and the way that they handle certain situations. So we're going to talk today just about the differences in generations, how do we get along with generations, and then at the end we'll talk about how do we reach these generations, especially in a group, if you're here as a representative of homemakers, especially in a group like homemakers, how do we get these younger generations to join our clubs? How do we reach them to tell them about our programs and different things that we have? And it looks different for everybody. And so especially with the digital age being what it is now, this really plays a part in these younger generations. So like I said, what we have on here, silent generation, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha. Are there any you've never heard of?
Yeah, Gen Alpha.
Gen Alpha, okay. And then does anybody know of one of those up there, there's only one that has a clear end and a clear beginning? Does anybody know which one it is? There's only one generation up there that no matter what research you look at, there is the same date that it starts and the same date that it ends. The other ones you'll see a year, 2 years fluctuating, but there's one generation up there that is a clear beginning and a clear end. All right, we'll talk about it. You will know by the end of this. All right, so what is a generation, right? And that it's just all people born and living at about the same time. So they experience the same things around the same life cycle that they're through, and then we see how that affects how they handle things in their future. What's the point of looking at generations? It allows us to look at similar experiences and study common outcomes. It allows us to look at the individual and kind of where they are in life and where they are in that cohort. We get to compare and contrast them, right? And so millennials especially is one that we'll talk about that they had some major things happen in their formative years and they kind of took 2 paths. And so there's one path of millennials that some people fall into and there's another that others fall into. And so we get to make those comparisons and contrast them. It gives insight into how to target and best serve different groups of people. And then it gives us insight into how future generations might handle certain situations and how we can prepare for them. Resources we can have, or different things we can do as a society to help those generations deal with the things that they're going through. So one fun thing about generations is that they're very cyclical. So we tend to differ from generation to the next because a lot of times we saw it was done this way and we didn't like it, so we're going to change it. But everything comes back in time, right? Everything is cyclical. So you'll see some similarities in newer generations that actually fall back to some of the older generations as well. So one big question that we get asked is, what are the generations? And so I've got the years up here. So the greatest generation is the oldest living generation currently. A majority of these people have passed, but we do still have several people from the greatest generation living. And we'll talk about each of these a little bit more individually. We'll really start to focus once we get to the silent generation, so that's that 1929 to 1945. Baby boomers, 46 to 64. Gen X, 65 to 80. Millennials are 1981 to 96. Then we start getting into the newer generations, 1997. It has 2 years there, 2010 to 2012, because we don't really know yet. And so some of the things that determine that is just when we start to see that divide of what happened in their childhoods that something happened different and they've handled it different ways. And so eventually that year will become a more defined year. But right now they're just not really sure when that one ends and then when Gen Alpha begins. Generations tend to fall within about a 15 to 20 year range. They are getting shorter, and the reason that is because we have so much more new technology and we are so much more globally connected and everybody kind of knows what's going on all the time. And so those world events and those cultural things aren't taking as long to shape generations. Does that make sense? And so the generations now are getting shorter in the way that they are. But still, they tend to fall about 15 years as a cohort on average. So how old does that make us this year? Or how old are they or will they turn in 2023? So the greatest generation you can see over there on the end, they're the people who are older than 95 years old. They fall into the greatest generation. The silent generation is 78 to 94 years old or will turn that this year. Baby boomers are 59 to 77, 43 to 58, 27 to 42, 11 to 13 to 26, and then ones who are currently being born. They think that Gen Alpha will end about year 2025. That's kind of the projection right now. But again, that'll change with time. But those are the babies currently being born to 11 to 13 years old. So it is telling, and I'll bring this up in a little bit, that there are no Gen Xers in this room, right? Oh, except our cameraman is a Gen Xer, but he is here for work, right? And so there are no voluntary Gen Xers in this room, and that we'll bring that back up here in a little bit. All right, so can we get along? There are some clashes between generations. Some generations just don't like the way younger kids do things, or they think that older people are just set in their ways and won't change, things like that. And so we do tend to see some clashes. You can see the X between ones that really have the most clashes. And so some of them are a little smaller than others. Silent generation and baby boomers just did a lot, especially in family life. They saw that differently. And so boomers went to work. Silent generation had the more traditional nuclear roles where mom stayed home and dad went to work. And the baby boomers saw that their mothers did not have financial independence, and they did not like that. And so they went to work. Women went to work. And that tended to cause some clash and some issues. Especially when women went into the workforce and men didn't want to work with women as well. And so there were some clashes there. There are some clashes between boomers and Gen X. They are complete opposites. And Gen X tends to think that boomers work too much, do too much, or are too much sometimes. And Gen Xers really just want to be left alone. And we'll talk about more of these as we go on. Currently, there's a big clash between millennials and boomers. And so millennials, and I will say this as a millennial, so I'll give full disclosure there that I am a millennial, but millennials are getting blamed on a lot of things that are not actually millennials right now. You're actually talking about Gen Z when you're talking about millennials right now. So we're mad about all these young kids, and I'll use my brother-in-law as an example. He harps on millennials all the time. He's like, these millennials, and so one day I said, you know you're a millennial, right? And he was like, no, I'm not. Yes, you're a millennial. And so knowing where these years end and start is important. But there is some clashing between millennials and baby boomers both ways. So Millennials want leadership roles that baby boomers still have in the workforce because they're still working. Baby boomers don't like the way millennials have changed the workplace, and so they don't want to give those roles up. And there's a lot of clash, especially in the workplace, between those two. Now, does it mean that they can't get along? Absolutely not. There are a lot of people who get along great. So these are all very blanket statements that we'll talk about. And there's always going to be people who, even if they are dead in the middle of that generation, they don't necessarily follow what we'll see. And a lot of different factors play into that. So the family that you were raised in, where you fall in the birth order, if you're the oldest child versus the youngest child versus the middle, that plays a part in how you handle situations as well, and that can offset some of the generational things that you maybe traditionally would have been part of. And then there's a little bit of clash between millennials and Gen Z, not a big one, but just because of that whole millennials are getting blamed for things that people are mad at Gen Zs about. And so millennials are like, that's not us. And so there's a little bit of clash there. The good news is, though, we get along too. So Gen Z and Gen X tend to get along really well. They have a lot of the same similarities. They have a lot of the same outlook on social issues. Baby boomers and Gen Z get along as well. Gen Z is very entrepreneurial. Baby boomers appreciate that. They like to see initiative. They want to see people start their own businesses and do these things. And so they like that. Millennials are very similar to the silent generation, actually. We do things differently because of technology, but in the way that we think and what we want for the world, we tend to have very similar views. And usually the silent generation appreciates that about millennials. We see a lot of millennials who are starting to stay home with their kids again. They're starting to do part-time work or try to bring that work-life balance back. And the silent generation tends to approve of that because they stayed home. They had that more nuclear family. And then you can see at the top there, everybody still likes Gen Alpha, right? They're babies. We still like them. We have nothing to not like them for. All right, so one thing I want you to use your little cards for. We're going to see this is a generation's aspiration. So while they are young adults, what they really crave or craved in that time period. So I want you to hold up the generation that you think in their young adult stage craved and aspired to freedom and flexibility. All right, home ownership. Who do you think aspired to home ownership when they were in their young adult stage? They just wanted to be able to own their own home. Some boomers, some silent generation. Okay, a Gen Z. All right, job security. Who cared about job security? And you don't have to get these right. That's the fun of this. All right. Mostly boomers there. We have some Gen X and some silent. Work-life balance. Who do you think that matters to? Mostly millennials up so far. A couple of Gen Xers, some Gen Z. And then security and stability. Who wants that? We all want that, right? But as a generational cohort, who tends to really look for that? In the choices that they make and the things that they do, they're really aspiring to security and stability. All right. So millennials are the ones who want freedom and flexibility. The silent generation wanted home ownership. The baby boomers cared about job security. Gen X was the ones who wanted work-life balance. So you can see just between those two things where we maybe have some clashes there. Baby boomers cared about jobs first. Jobs were priority. Gen Xers, home is priority. Job comes second. And then security and stability is actually Gen Z. So they've had a lot of instability in their young life already. And not necessarily in their homes. Some of them in their homes, absolutely. But just in the world, it's just been kind of hectic, right, in their formative years. And so they really crave security and stability. That is why a lot of them are entrepreneurial, because they want to make sure that they have control over their situation. They saw their parents get laid off because a lot of jobs, shut down. They saw moves, they saw all these different things, and they don't want that for themselves. And so that is something they really reach for. And then Gen Alpha, we don't know yet, right? We'll learn about them as the time comes. They're just having fun right now. All right, things to know. This one is not just a one answer one. So who do you think values loyalty? Which generations value loyalty? You hope all of them do, right? So let me put it this way. Let's do it this way. Value loyalty in the workplace. Everybody values loyalty at home, but who do we think values loyalty in the workplace? Okay, we've got boomers, silent generation, a Gen Xer. Okay. Who uses technology? Who uses technology?
Oh, I always do.
Mostly younger ones is what you have up. Who seeks stability? Okay, Gen Z we just learned about does. Who's competitive? Boomers, Gen Z, okay. Or Gen X, I mean. Who lived through trauma? Lived through trauma. Not personal trauma, but like world events. Who has lived through trauma? What'd you say?
All of them.
All of them. And then who is currently in the workforce? Everybody but Alpha. Somebody said that. All right, so value loyalty. Loyalty in the workplace used to be extremely important. Silent generation and baby boomers take that very seriously. We see that less now since Gen X. Gen X is the ones who cared about work-life balance, and so if their job did not provide them the opportunity for work-life balance, they were more likely to leave. Millennials tend to care, we like work-life balance, but what we really like is being able to move on the job, so not having to sit at a desk. We would rather work when we're most productive, right? Studies show us that businesses make more profits when their employees work when they're the most productive. And for some people, that's not 8 to 5. And so they're trying to change the workplace a little bit of extended hours, maybe different locations, remote work, things like that. And we see a lot of millennials that they are very loyal to their company while they work there. And they typically are very loyal to the company themselves. Millennials leave jobs because of managers. Millennials tend to leave jobs because leaders don't let them maybe have that hybrid work schedule or work location, or they don't ethically agree with what their leaders are doing. It may not be that their leaders are doing anything ethically wrong, they just tend to see those things differently. And so by and large, we see that millennials are very loyal to companies. They are not loyal to managers and to people. They want to make sure that they really get along with that person. Again, a lot of managers right now are boomers. And so we tend to see that clash a lot because, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, the feedback that those two generations want is completely different. And so boomers tended to like that once a year, give me praise for how good I did for the whole year. I want that recognition, I want that award, I want that plaque. Millennials want you to just tell me that I've done it wrong so that I don't do it wrong again. Tell me now, don't wait for my year-end evaluation to tell me that I've been doing something wrong for a whole year. And so the management style there causes a lot of tension. Use technology, we all do. Whether we want to or not, whether we chose to or not, whether we purchased that technology on our own or our children purchased it for us. Just the world that we live in, you may not use the latest technology or the newest technology, but we all use technology. Seek stability. This is not saying that there are boomers who don't seek stability, because they do, but that wasn't their first priority, and it's not yet for, they don't think that it will be for Gen Alpha either. Competitive. Everybody is a little bit competitive, and we always have people within the generations who are competitive, right? But as a generational cohort, baby boomers are extremely competitive. Does anybody know why? There's a very clear reason why they became such a competitive group. All right, we'll talk about it. Millennials are similar, ironically, in that competitiveness, but instead of being competitive, they call them achievement-oriented. So millennials are okay if the whole team achieves. So we're not individually competitive, but there is that achievement goal that millennials do have. Live through trauma, we all did, and somebody said that, and then currently in the workforce, everybody but Alpha. And there are some Alphas, some of the older Alphas who do work for parents' businesses, things like that, work on the farm, that sort of stuff. But actually in the tax-paying workforce, Gen Alpha is not yet. So again, just a reminder of how old they are currently, because I think that that's helpful to know before we get started on the rest of it. Do you all have questions at all so far before we dive into each generation? All right, so let's talk really quick about the greatest generation, because we do still have people from this generation who are active, who are living, and who may even still be in some of your homemaker clubs. So on the other slides, we'll have something in each square of these, but for the greatest generation, we're just going to kind of talk more broadly. So their family life, they were young adults during the Roaring 20s, so they saw very prosperous lives. Spending and fun and parties and all of that was very important. Everybody was doing well financially, not everybody, but a large percentage of people were doing well financially, and then it all came crashing down. And they were young adults starting families, seeing this really play out when the Great Depression happened, and then also the Spanish flu. It is important to note that this generation, once they got to young adult stage, they birthed a lot of babies, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. This generation is sometimes also called the GI generation, because a majority of its people served in World War II in some capacity. And so if you ever hear GI generation, that is also the greatest generation. Finances, so yes, they did live through the Great Depression, but they were getting old enough that they got to see how that could play out and learn those skills. So they still did enjoy, because they had lived through the Roaring 20s, they still did enjoy film, art, and books. They are also sometimes called the swing generation because their music is very popular and still is very popular today. The radio was their technology of the time. It boomed in popularity because they loved the music, and then also because President Roosevelt at the time did fireside chats over the radio. And so technology wasn't that big except for the radio, and a lot of homes had that. Work life, most were involved in the war. And when they came home, they found occupations with similar skills, or they went to industry jobs. And then characteristic traits, they fared well after the Depression because they learned the skills to survive. So we'll see in the next generation that the next generation was so young when the Depression happened that they didn't learn the skills. They saw their parents struggle, and then that kind of played out in their adulthood. Whereas this generation, they were the ones who had to figure it out, right? They had kids in this Great Depression era, or they were kind of starting to spend. And so they learned those skills, and then they carried those skills throughout their life. And so they actually did pretty well financially because they were very conservative, and they learned how to make do without, use rations, things like that. Questions at all? All right, so silent generation. Tell me some things, look at the years, and tell me some things that you know that these people lived through.
The Great Depression.
The Great Depression, right? We were much younger ages during the Great Depression, but absolutely that played a part in how these people were raised and in those formative years.
And World War II.
And World War II as well, that's right. So you will see overlap in that, in some of these things, because these were huge events that, lasted for years, right? Or had impact for years, if not. What else? How do we think they are financially?
The ones that I knew best were very financially well off.
Okay.
They did really well.
Okay. What about technology? What was the technology at the time?
That's where you said the radio was.
So radio was kind of boomed during greatest generation. There's a big one that kind of booms during this generation.
Television.
Oh, not yet.
Not yet. Oh,
Yeah.
Well, okay.
And then what about family life? What did their families look like? Big families? Yeah. Mom and dad, both in the picture? Yeah. So we had nuclear families who had fixed gender roles, right? Dad went to work, mom stayed home. Some moms did work, but they still were the ones who cooked, cleaned, did all of the household chores, took care of the kids. The majority of families looked alike. You obviously have the people who skew the graph a little bit, because again, these are blanket statements, but for the most part, everybody's family looked alike. World events, Pearl Harbor, World War II, return of servicemen, and the Great Depression. And so those are kind of the big things that, again, they were much younger on the Great Depression side than the Greatest Generation, but still that played a huge role in their childhoods and in how they learned how to handle life. So the finances, the stock market crash, they learned to, or they saw their parents or older siblings work off rations. They had very poor childhoods, which they learned to share or make do without. So we tend to see that people in this generation don't have a lot of excess. They may have small excess, like small things that don't cost a lot that add up. Because this generation, we also see if they have it, they keep it because they might need it later, right? And so we don't tend to see this generation give a lot away or throw a lot away because you never know when you're going to need it. These are the people who tend to, save their plastic wrap or their aluminum foil, things like that, because they saw that as kids, that was needed. Or they just make do without. And so they don't need whatever that new thing is because what's the point of it? They did fine without it before. The car was the big emerging technology for this group. Current technology use, it's often family encouraged. Their kids bought it for them or wanted them to get it. Maybe they had an older phone and their kids want them to get a smartphone so they can text them, things like that. Mostly disengaged. They're not connected to their phones a lot. They have it because they need it. They have it because it is useful when it's needed. But past that, you're not going to see them on their phones a ton. But you do have, sort of like the millennials, you do have some that have fully embraced technology. They love their phone. They're on it all the time. They know how to use it. They have different apps. So you do have some that have really embraced it. That's been a fun thing for them to learn since it came out. So work-life jobs are for life. When you get a job, you stay there. You save the money that you make. They still want face-to-face communication. They still want face-to-face feedback. They don't want an online evaluation or anything like that. And this generation does not take on leadership roles. So they are very active in the community, and they want to be active. You can see that in the next part. They want to be involved. They want to serve their community, but they don't want the chairmanships, the presidents, any of that. They just want to do the work and not be recognized for it. So they value that loyalty and stability. They are very good at following rules and respecting authority. They think before they act. And they really like to serve things that are for the greater good of the community. So not just personal benefit, but how can the community benefit from me doing this? And they're more likely to get involved. But remember that leadership role piece here in a minute. So I always think it's fun to look at how this played out, right? So the Great Depression led to them having very poor childhoods. That led to them as adults saving the money they did have, right? There are almost always reasons for the way that we are, the way that we are. There's a reason for the way that we are, however you want to say that. And a lot of times if you just look back to what went on in their formative years, you can usually pinpoint it, which is the fun of generations and studying those. So the McCarthy era, what was the McCarthy era?
Everybody's a communist.
Everybody's a communist, right?
If you don't follow the rules.
If you don't follow the rules, so again, follow the rules and respect authority. They were very big into that. The other thing was you were afraid to talk, right? You didn't speak up. They weren't poster carriers. They weren't big marchers, strikers, anything like that. That was part of that McCarthy area. That's why they got their name Silent Generation. They aren't typically the generation that speaks up. They'll do the right thing, but they very much respect authority and follow the rules. So these are some famous Silent Generation individuals. I learned through doing this study that Anne Frank and Barbara Walters were the same age, which is crazy to think about. For me, I learned, Anne Frank was huge whenever I was in middle school. Reading the book and kind of learning what she went through and realizing that she could still be alive today is like, oh my gosh, like you just assume she was the 1700s when you read those kind of books, And to think that was that recent of a story that she could be alive today was interesting to me. So we have Desmond Tutu, that is Warren Buffett. The second top picture there, does anybody know who the third guy is? That is Shel Silverstein.
Who?
Shel Silverstein, the author of The Giving Tree, and some of those other, I can't even think of now what that other book is. Yes, Where the Sidewalk Ends. Thank you. So played a huge role just through his on a lot of generations. Alex Trebek. This is Sandra Day O'Connor. And then that is Neil Armstrong there. So there are a lot more, but these are people who are from the Silent Generation. If you look up here, these people are famous for what as a whole?
Being in the public.
Okay. But did they take on intentional leadership roles? They're famous for their jobs, for the work that they did, except for Anne Frank. But even still, she became famous because of her writings, right? And her story. And so these people they were doing the work and just doing the work that they were supposed to be doing, and that made them famous. They didn't just jump into the spotlight to get that spotlight. So there are leaders in every generation, right? But they didn't just jump into these roles for that showiness. They got up here because they did good work for a long time or consistent work. A lot of these people held the same job for very long periods of time, right? Again, that loyalty piece. All right, so their mothers stayed home. Some of them went to work. They went to work. Women got financial independence. Divorce rate boomed. They did live through the Vietnam and the Cold Wars, the Civil Rights Movement, several assassinations. They value financial freedom, big time. Because of this, because of the fact that their financial freedom is so important to them, they become very competitive. This also came from their childhoods because the schools were not equipped to handle the boom of babies. And so they put a ton of kids per classroom. We're used to one teacher could do several classes, several different groups, or even whenever they had their own individual grades, they were much smaller. So then all of a sudden a ton of kids were in one classroom, and that naturally just led them to become very competitive, to get the attention, to be the good kid, good grades, all of that. They became very competitive. That then turned into them coining the phrase workaholics. This is the generation that we get workaholics from. Job is priority. They live to work, and that kind of all plays out in how they are. So they have that I earned it, I can spend it, I'm gonna spend it mentality. TV really emerged for this group where it became more household. Oh, look, that bottom part did not change. The technology is not right on baby boomers, so I'll fix that. They are very big into like email, things that they can check while at work, things that they can do while at work. They aren't big into technology that distracts them from work. So if you can play it into their work, they're going to use it. If you can have them use it and it lets them work more, they're going to use it. So smartphones, things like that, they have embraced because it allows them to keep working, right? Work is defined by employers. So they are very loyal to their workplace. They work all the time, and they're going to do what they are told to do by their employer. 80% will work after age 65. So this is, again, where we see that piece with millennials really clashing because this generation is still in the workforce and in a lot of those upper management roles. And millennials have now been in the workplace for 10, 20 years, and we're ready to take on some of those roles, and we're ready for the boomers to not get out of the workplace, because you see a lot of mentor programs where we want to learn from them, but just allow us to take on some of those leadership roles. The other thing is, because of their classroom situations, they did a lot of group work, a lot of teamwork, a lot of committees, because teachers, it was one teacher with now, 20 plus 30 something kids, which is normal now, but it wasn't then. And so they did a lot of group work, and that plays out in how they are as managers and how they are as work. So they love committees, they love committee, under committees, co-committees, subcommittees, all of that. Love to have meetings about committees. These are the people who, they want to see it happen. They want the teamwork to happen, but they want the recognition for making all the teamwork happen. So character traits. They love social interaction. They love to be out and about. They love chamber events and networking events and anything that they can go to get that social interaction, to potentially get that recognition. And they are very goal-oriented, and they love a challenge. And again, that sort of plays out from that competitive classroom situation. Some reasoning there. The financial independent led to divorce, which we talked about. The return of servicemen led to lots of babies, which led to lots of them in the classroom with committees and teamwork, like we talked about, which also led to them becoming very competitive. Because they're competitive, their job is their priority, and because they're competitive, they really like recognition. So one thing to take away from this And we say this all, like if you have a Gen Xer, for example, and we'll talk about them a little bit more in a minute, and they do something good at work or good in your organization, whatever it is, and you give them all the praise, you put their picture in the paper, and you give them a big plaque in front of everybody, they're not going to do it again because they did not want that recognition. They wanted to do their job and go on. If you do that to a boomer, they're going to do it again. If you just put like a note on a boomer's desk, they'll appreciate it, but they're probably not going to work as hard the next time because you didn't give the show. Now again, these are blanket statements, but as a whole, if you want to see the behavior continue, this is the group that you want to publicly recognize. All right, so some famous boomers, and there are a bunch because again, competitive, wanted recognition, but I intentionally put these people on there. So we have Bill Gates, we have Steve Jobs, and then we have 4 presidents. So until the last time actually I gave this presentation, the silent generation was the only generation, remember that's the generation before that does not like leadership roles. They had never birthed a president. That was the only generation in history to not give birth to a president. But President Biden is a member of the silent generation. So they have now birthed a president, they have one. And that goes to show you the boomers have 4. And potentially could still have more, right? So there's a major difference between those 2 generations there. All right, Gen X. What they lived through.
The end of the Vietnam War.
Okay.
Yeah. More soldiers come home.
So Gen X starts with the birth control being approved, right? And so this is a group of, as children, much smaller families. We have a lot of only kids. We have a lot of only having one sibling, not having 28 cousins, 48 cousins, whatever it is. And so that played out in them being a very private generation. They kind of stick to themselves. That's what they were used to. A big thing that this generation that played a part in that is these were the latchkey kids. So mom and dad were both at work. They got off the bus. They came home. They let themselves in their house. They took care of themselves. They made their own snack. They did their homework. They did their own thing until mom and dad got home from work. That alone plays out in a lot of the rest of this. So smaller families, divorced parents, dual working parents, maybe double households, and then again that latchkey kid. So they just had a lot of independent time. And because of that, they still like a lot of independent time. They don't like to be surrounded by a lot of people. They don't like big groups. They cannot stand to be micromanaged. They were 10-year-olds getting off the bus and could handle themselves. And so now as adults, they've got it, right? They cannot stand committees, ironically. They cannot stand that micromanage, that constant supervision. Just, I got it, is kind of their thing, right? If you know some Gen Xers in the workplace, this tends to be very true of a lot of them. So finances, they don't really care. They saw the boomers care only about making money and spending that money, and they just don't really care as much about it. So they're more motivated by how it's going to benefit their personal life than their financial, than their pocket. Many have more debt than they do savings. And so this was the time when mortgages and credit cards were the norm. And so they don't see it as being bad because it was just, that's how you grew your household, that's how you handled things. And so that is their norm. Many have more debt than savings. And again, they're not that workaholic generation, so they're not going to come in and put in all the extra overtime to make that change. That is totally normal to them. PC was emerging technology. They have become a very tech-savvy group. They were right on the cusp of you're either going to learn it or totally miss out, or you're not going to learn it or totally miss out, or you're going to learn it and you're going to excel. And I will say that here, there is a Gen Xer in this office, and she's always the person that we go to for tech things because they were old enough that it wasn't just norm. They were old enough to learn how to troubleshoot. Whereas my generation, we've just always had it. So people will come to me and say, how do I do this? I'm like, I don't know. I know how to use it when it works, but I've never had to make it work when it didn't, Whereas Gen Xers, they had to figure it out from the very start. So they're very tech savvy. Their big thing is work smarter, not harder. Why would I work 9 to 5 if I can do it from 9 to 3 and just get it all done? Why are we going to have 12 committees when we can have one and get it all done? And then they are called the digital immigrants. So they kind of came into the digital world and had to embrace it. They work to live, they don't live to work. They value that work-life balance. That's extremely important to them. They came from parents who did not have that work-life balance, and they crave it for themselves. Again, that autonomy on the job and hating to be micromanaged, I got it. I'll do it. Please don't look over my shoulder while I do it. Just trust me. Very private, value stability, they value friendship. We see a lot of these groups this generation have very close friendships that they hang with a lot, but ironically, they're not joiners. So homemakers, for example, this is a big gap in homemaker membership. We have a lot of silent generation and we have a lot of boomers. And then what's an issue that we constantly talk about in homemakers? How do we get people to join, right? And that's because right now should be Gen Xers' time to shine in groups like this, and they are not joiners. And so a lot of groups, Lions Clubs and different things, unless it is work related or work required, a lot of clubs see this dip in membership when Gen Xers come up, because Gen Xers are gonna go home at the end of the day. They wanna be with their families. They crave that work-life balance. Why are they gonna go do something additional on top of what they already have to do? So this is a tough group to get to be joiners, but it also is a really important group. We can't just skip over them. We can't just be like, well, they're not gonna join, so let's just go to millennials. Because this group, with what they had to learn and how they do things, they're typically very efficient because they wanna do that work smarter, not harder. They have really good ideas. They're usually very innovative. And so we want to embrace them and be part of that. We just have to figure out more creative ways to get them to join. And a big one is that piece up there under finances. How can it benefit them personally? How can it benefit their family? Why can we justify you coming to spend an hour of your time with us away from your family? Let's tell them how it benefits their whole family if they'll just do it. So what can they learn while they're with us that will benefit their family or them personally? So again, just some of these things. They had dual working parents. That made them value work-life balance. The latchkey kids can't stand to be micromanaged now. Because they work to live and not live to work and like that work-life balance, they took on a lot of debt. Some famous Gen Xers. So do we know who these people are? Anybody know who the woman on the top left is?
I don't know who the guy on the left is.
Okay, so the woman on the top left is J.K. Rowling. She wrote the Harry Potter series. She was had $10 to her name when she wrote the Harry Potter series. And if I remember right, she started it on the back of a bar napkin and just kind of started it. And then it's turned into this billion-dollar franchise, right? And so she, as strange as that sounds that she wrote a franchise, she has impacted generations just because of a book that she wrote. The top right-hand guy, does anybody know who that is?
Sure does.
That's the Prime Minister of Canada. And so we do see some leadership roles with this group, but they have different ideas of how they're going to do it. And so he is in the news a lot because he's doing things differently, right? We have Mike Tyson here. We have Elon Musk here, Kobe Bryant, and then the guy on the left is Todd Beamer. Todd Beamer, he was the man who he took over the hijackers of the plane on 9/11 that was headed for the White House or the Pentagon, and it crashed in the field. He was a Gen Xer. All right, millennials. What do we know about them? 1981 to 96, what happened in that time frame? I know, history class today.
Twin Towers.
September 11th, huge one. They initially thought, when, again, the generations you start out weird on projected years, initially they thought that this group ended with September 11th because that was such a huge thing, and they thought that would be so formative from that point on of babies born and babies born after. So initially this group you saw end in 2001. As we have grown up, they've shortened that. They realized that those who were still young enough before September 11th are acting more like the ones who were born after. And that really the 1996 were old enough to potentially remember when September 11th happened. So we've kind of backed that up a little bit.
Would that have been when the space shuttle exploded?
Yes, the Challenger explosion. Yep. Yep. Which a lot of people watched on TV, right?
Yeah, my daughter was homesick.
Watched it happen. Yep. And a lot of them watched it happen while at school. Yep. Another one would be the Oklahoma City bombing and the Columbine High School shooting. And so for a group who was in school at that time, that was a very traumatic event to think that you could go into school and be shot. And at the time, that was a new thing. So family looked different. No longer was mom at home, dad at work, or even mom and dad both in the household, or even mom and dad both in the picture. So we started to see some differences in families, differences in nuclear households. Biggest thing about this generation, we had, and I say we because I am a millennial, we had highly structured, very overscheduled lives. So we were the generation that got picked up from school, went to dance class, went to music practice, went to basketball practice, went to brother's game, then went home, had a real quick supper, went to bed. And so because of that, you'll see that play out some. But we are the generation of time management, overscheduled. Sure, we can make that work even though we have 12 things that day, because that's what we grew up with. Another very important piece is we were protected by our parents. So we had the parents who told us we were special, told us we were great, loved us very much, but maybe should have, and I have wonderful parents, but maybe should have let us handle some things on our own. Maybe should have let us get in trouble at school instead of going and saying it's the teacher's fault sort of thing. That sort of started with our generation. We see that more now, but that sort of started with us. So September 11th, Iraq War, Challenger explosion, and then some bombings and shootings. Finances, right when we were getting into our young adult years and graduating college, the recession hit. And so a lot of people took jobs that they were overqualified for because they were just happy to get a job at that point. We have a lot of student debt because we were the generation that was told college was important. College was mandatory. You had to go to college to be successful in life. We can't necessarily help you pay for it, but you got to go to college. And so we have a lot of student debt. And then the explosion of the internet happened while we were in that young adult stage. Smartphone was our emerging technology. We were digital natives. We are very well educated because we went to college. And because of the digital native, the internet explosion, we are more globally aware. So we are now not only aware of what's going on in our communities, what's going on in our state, we now know what's going on in India and in Guatemala and in all these other places because it's on the internet. There are pros and cons to that, actually. So work life, we want instant feedback. Again, it's that, don't tell me I did it wrong 8 months ago. Tell me 8 months ago that I did it wrong, so I probably didn't do it wrong on purpose, right? So tell me now so I can change it. We are a very collaborative group. We like to work with other people and make something happen. Because of this overscheduled lives, we are multitaskers. And a big thing, we work with an organization, not for. So we like to see ourselves as a part of the company, not an employee of the company. Does that make sense? We are employees, but we like to believe that we are taking part in their mission. Civic-minded, so that's where we play into being similar to the silent generation. We receive participation ribbons, which I will say, and I like to say this, that is something that people give millennials a bad rap for. Like, we're always on, you guys got participation ribbons for everything, and there was no first, second place, you got participation ribbons. We did not give ourselves participation ribbons. Another generation gave us participation ribbons. And now, ironically, you will see that a lot of millennial parents do not want their children to have participation ribbons. We would rather you give our children first, second, third, or last place, because we did get that. That is where the difference comes in I talked about boomers and millennials are both very competitive, but it's not the same, that boomers are very individually competitive. Millennials are achievement oriented, but we don't have that individual competitiveness because when we were kids, everybody was the same, right? Right. And so because of that, we're usually really good team players because we want our whole team to win because why not anyway? There was no individual recognition. And because of that explosion of the internet, all of that, we tend to be very socially engaged. So again, just kind of how some of this all plays out. In every generation. Our parents had good intentions when they gave us participation ribbons. It was part of that protection. All right, so some famous millennials. We have Michael Phelps, Serena Williams, Mark Zuckerberg, who is the founder of Facebook and now I think many other things. Prince William, just to kind of give you a placing in age, the next in line to the throne is a millennial. That is Kim Jong-un, which I probably said his name wrong. And so I did include him because not all people are famous for great things, right? And I also think it's important to include that he is the dictator of a country and he's a millennial. And so that we are old enough to have some of these roles, even though a lot of times we get looked at as being too young to take on some of these things. So we kind of fall across the spectrum. So you have two people there, their birth order and the family they were born into plays a huge role in why they are in the position that they're in, right? All right, Gen Z, we don't have a ton on, but these are our youngest in the current workforce. What do we know about them? Or what do we know about what they've lived through? Gen Z, 1997 to, again, we don't know when they'll end, 2010, 2012.
Okay, so they actually would have experienced the destruction of the World Trade?
Yes.
Okay,
So the oldest ones, yes. And that's again where that got backed up. So the majority of Gen Zers don't really remember that happening. Their life was impacted by it, absolutely. But they don't necessarily remember that being a thing. They remember the aftermath of it. They remember, but this is a generation that you probably can't look at and say, where were you, when that happened? Whereas my generation, just one above it, I can tell you exactly where I was and what I was doing and what got said and everything about that day. So yes, they were absolutely impacted by that. They just didn't necessarily live through that trauma. Does that make sense? All right, so we see their families are diverse. For some of these people, they're not even with their blood families, right? We start to see some of those parents staying home again. That work-life balance coming back a little bit, but we're seeing dads stay home now too, and moms are going to work. They still have the highly structured, overscheduled lives. Some of the world events, there's just school shootings have become almost the norm. That has led to gun control debates. Women's rights has been a huge thing right now. And the explosion of social media. So that isn't a specific, this day, this happened, but you cannot deny that social media has had a major impact on the world and what happens in it. So some interesting things on finances. These are the people who saw that their parents had a lot of debt or took on a lot of debt to go to college, and so they are scared to take on that student debt. So we are seeing the education piece of this generation play out much differently than the generation before them. Slow fashion is what they call it. It's the bottom there. They like to shop at secondhand stores, thrift stores, instead of that mainstream. So they want to see, they're very globally engaged. And so they're very against like the sweatshop thing. They're very against all the excess that the fashion industry has. They have really kind of taken on the fashion industry a little bit. They're very big into seeing some recycling and different things like that happen within the fashion industry. And I will tell you, I went the other day to a thrift store, and I'm a thrift store shopper too, so I a little bit am with the Gen Zs on this, but whenever I pulled into the parking lot, it was like full of Range Rovers and like Toyota 4Runners and all these very fancy new cars, and not traditionally what we stereotype thrift stores with, right? And when I walked in, it was all like 18 to 20-year-olds. And so I said something about it because I'm not hip and trendy and don't know what's going on. I was like, what's happening? Why are there so many kids here? And the worker was like, that's the thing to wear right now is stuff from thrift stores. I was like, oh, I think that's great. I am now trendy because I wear thrift store stuff, right? And I didn't mean to. I'm just cheap. But they do it because of the slow fashion piece. It's called slow fashion because instead of something being in style and going straight out of style and then being waste, it's in style and now they're bringing it back in style so it's slower to exit the fashion cycle. And then because of this, we see that they actually are good savers. So they like to save their money. They spend it at thrift stores instead of big box stores, and then they save the rest. So technology, 3D printing is a big one for them right now. I know nothing about 3D printing, but my niece can tell me things that can be made with it, and she has things that are made from 3D printing. They have never known a world without technology. Never. They were born into a world that a phone in the hand was the norm. This is something that they get faulted for a lot, and it's really not their fault. It's just the world that they were born into. Now, they also are called the digital device addicts, but again, not their fault. If they're constantly handed a phone when they were younger, they didn't hand themselves the phone, right? And unfortunately, we do see research on it does have addictive tendencies on the brain, and so that is, again, out of their control. So because of this scared to take on student debt, they're just starting their own jobs, starting their own businesses. They don't want to go to college, so what can they do by themselves that they have control over, they don't need the education for? They're very entrepreneurial. If they are in the workplace, we see that a lot of them are employed part-time, and they are the generation that is big into apprenticeships and trades instead of college. Part of this because those are needs again. So my generation, we were all told to go to college, so the trade area really went down. So that there is a need for that, but also it's inspired by that student debt fear as well. They're a very innovative group. They're globally engaged. They value inclusivity and individuality. So they are very big into embracing who people are, where they are, how they are, why they are. They don't want you to tell them that they have to be a certain way or dress a certain way to be part of something. They want to be able to come as they are and have their own thoughts and be respected for that. So we see that a lot in this group. They're very quirky almost in the way that they dress and the way that they act, and that is because being your own person is very big to this group. So again, just some things of how we see that stuff cycle through. So some famous Gen Zers, and there's not a ton because they're just kind of getting to the ages of being famous, but because of the fact that they have access to social media and digital things, and they are so globally aware, they are famous. Actually, a lot of the famous Gen Zers that we saw, or that I saw while looking through this, they're all like social media stars because they all follow each other and watch each other. I didn't know who they were, but they are a lot of them are gaining their status as being celebrity or famous because of something that they've posted on social media or something they've done. So this is Malala, and I got really excited because one list that I saw had Malala as a millennial, and I was like, yes, like, I'm going to claim her. And then the next one had her as a Gen Z. I was like, dang. So I looked up her birthday. She was born in January of 1997. So I'm going to claim her as an honorary millennial. She was kind of right on the cusp, so she might fall into that. But if you know, Malala is the one who fights for women's rights in education. Started with being able to read, I believe, in her country. But I also do know that, so my niece is a Gen Zer potentially with her birth years there, and Malala is like a very big role model for the young middle school girls right now, which is great. This right here is Katie Ledecky. She's an Olympic star, and she's already won several gold medals at her young age. The girl with the braids is Greta Thunberg. Does anybody know Greta Thunberg's story? She is the one who challenged, I've just lost all words, climate change, not even climate change, it's more specific than that. But she spoke out against a company that was doing wrong to the climate, she felt, and then it has just kind of snowballed from there. That she has now even been approached as like, almost as like an expert in some things on climate change and things like that, and is very young. She just felt compelled to speak out. So this generation, I really think we'll see a lot of leaders from, because they are not afraid to speak up, especially if it's something that they think is wrong and they want it to be right. The bottom left, that is the girl who read the poem at the presidential inauguration that she had written. And then the top there is Maxwell Frost, and he is the first Gen Z congressman. So he was elected this year, actually in January. He took on his role as a congressman, I believe from Florida. I looked that up, but I can't remember, but I believe he's from Florida. And so he is the first Gen Z in the House of Representatives in Washington. So I really think we will see a lot from this group. And they're going to change the game because of how globally connected they are and the big ideas that they have. There's probably going to be some clashing when this group starts to get in. And they're not afraid of that. So Gen Alpha, we don't really have a lot of famous people yet, but there are 3 from Gen Alpha who are famous simply because of how they were born. But that gives you an idea just on ages, kind of what we're looking at with Gen Alpha. All right, so some quick things just on the workplace. 2% of silent generation is still in the workforce. They are still very valued in the workforce. They're very dependable, very loyal. We talked about straightforward. Employers should provide work opportunities that give them the opportunity to contribute and emphasize that stability. That's why they're in the workforce, is they want that stability. 25% of the workforce is baby boomers. They are still competitive. They are still workaholics. They are still team-oriented, love committees, love all of those things. They still want recognition. They want goals. They want specific deadlines. One thing that we see a lot of people trying to put them in those mentor and coaching roles, so to bring up the next generation, if they are willing to step back a little bit and do that. 33% of the workforce is Gen X. They're the flexible people. They're the independent. Give them that immediate feedback. Give them those flexible work arrangements, and then just let them do their job. That's kind of how they work best. The majority of the workforce right now is millennials, barely, but still. We're that achievement-oriented, open-minded. We want immediate feedback. We want our employers to get to know us personally. We want you to know, about our family, to ask about our family. We want to be managed by results. So if I'm doing a good job, then I want to be managed that way. And if I'm not, punish me for it. That's fine if I'm not doing a good job. But we want to be result-driven. And then we're that generation that has really brought on flexible schedule and work assignments. So let us work from home. Well, let us work at the library. Let us work until 7 o'clock, but start later, or start earlier and end earlier if we need to. Because again, there is research that shows that profits increase when you let your employees work when they are most productive. And then Gen Z, only 5% in the workforce right now, but they're the progressive entrepreneurial. They are a little bit less focused because they have so many outside distractions. So they still like that work-life balance. They like to work on multiple projects at the same time. And they want that independence piece. So they want to be able to put they like that individuality, remember? So they want to be able to put their spin on what they're working on. There's just kind of a pie chart that shows you how it plays out. So a couple of myths, and we're almost done. Research shows, one thing that gets said a lot is that younger generations aren't as loyal, which we did see. Again, we don't value loyalty to a company as much, but that doesn't mean that younger generations aren't as loyal. They're loyal while they work for the company, but we don't really believe in long-term jobs anymore. And so we have very high expectations for jobs, and this isn't just millennials, this is Gen X down. And when we leave, this part is mostly millennials. It is often due to management or lack of feedback. Younger generations have poor work habits. No, they're just different. So again, that productivity, if you would let us work when we're most productive, we actually have very good work habits. We actually are the generations that we have the smartphone, so we constantly are checking our email and constantly working, replying to emails after hours, on weekends, things like that. But unfortunately, that leads to a lot of burnout. So we do see a lot of people leave their job because of burnout, and that's because we are working in these hours that aren't that 9 to 5. We don't necessarily switch off at 5 o'clock. Older employees are slow and less productive. Studies actually show that that is not true. There are only minor differences. They may be slower at a certain task that involves technology, but they can be more efficient at a task that is more traditional. And so it's just giving your employees the right job. And it doesn't just have to be in a work situation, in a group situation. If you will assign people the things that they are good at, their strengths, you're going to be more productive, right? Older employees won't let go of the reins and allow younger workers to take on more responsibility. We do see this happening. But we do, it's because boomers are still working because they were impacted by the same recession as the younger generations. They were just older, and some of them were getting ready to potentially be able to retire, and then it was like, nope, never mind, can't do that anymore. And so now they're still working. So the way that a lot of companies are handling this is they're asking them to pass on those skills to the younger generation through, again, those mentor and coaching roles. Current leadership is still by far boomers and Gen Xers. So the median age of the Senate is 65.3 years old, which is boomers. The median age of the House of Representatives, they are getting a little younger. They are 57.9, Gen Xers. Current president is, again, the only president from the silent generation. Current Speaker of the House is barely a Gen Xer. He's a January 1965. He was almost a boomer. And then the minority leader in the House is also a Gen Xer. And then the current Senate leaders, the majority is a silent or the minority now, I think, is a silent, and the majority is a boomer. Millennials do want to take on leadership roles. So again, we've talked about this. They just work very differently. So there is a lot of tension, but it can be worked on. Another thing to know and consider, more than half of people in their 40s are currently sandwiched. So while we've been talking about generations based on years, there is another popular thing, the sandwich generation, and that is people who are taking care of their aging parents and also still raising their children. So their children are still in the home, but they're having that extra step of taking care of their parents. Right now, that is people in their 40s. More than half of them are in that sandwich generation. This is a very, it's important to note because if you're wanting them to join that, these people are very pressed for time. But they also are craving resources and knowledge that can help them alleviate some of this. And so this generation, it has nothing to do with years because we have millennials, Gen Xers, and even some boomers who are still in these scenarios. They need a lot of resources. They want a lot of attention and resources to try to help them work through this situation that they're in. So if you can highlight how your organization, your group, can give them skills to handle this, or you can maybe include their kids or include their parents, they're going to be more likely to join your group. All right, ways to reach each generation. Silents still want to be called. They like personalized notes, face-to-face. They do read text messages. They don't want material things anymore. They don't need any more stuff. For them, promote the ease of use. Don't take too many steps to register. But they have found that social media ads do work for this group. So they do scroll, if they have social media, they do scroll it, and they do pay attention to those ads. Boomers, again, they're the highest value consumers in today's market. They have money and they like to spend it. Facebook direct ads tend to work, but they're the least likely generation to make a purchase from a smartphone. So they may see it on Facebook, but they want to call somebody to order it. They want to talk to somebody to know what they're getting, to know how much they're paying, to know that it's actually coming in the mail, and that it really does work. They're very loyal customers, so if you can get them to like your product, they'll like your product for life. They still leave and listen to voicemails, and a lot of generations do not. I will say, I don't even think my voicemail is set up on my phone. And my mom, love her. I love my mom. But she'll leave a voicemail and she'll just be like, hey mom, it's mom, call me back. I saw that you called. I will call you back. You don't have to leave. That was 5 extra minutes of my time. But this is the generation that you can leave a voicemail and they will still listen to it. If you are going to spend your time leaving a voicemail for orange down, just don't even spend the time. Just talk to them when you talk to them. So, important to note. Another thing about boomers, they don't like to, this is very specific, but they don't like to read articles that are more than 300 words. So summarize what you have to say. They are, again, the efficient group. They've got work to do. And so they don't want to be distracted for long periods of time. So they are not going to read blog posts. They are not going to read long articles. So short and sweet, what you want them to do, what you want them to know, put it in there. TV and newspaper ads still work, but again, they want to be able to call somebody to actually do the ordering. For Gen Xers, they are the hybrid group. So they grew up going to stores. They still like to go to stores, but they also embrace technology. So they do a lot of online shopping as well. They are the group that is cynical about their retirement income. They are the group that you'll hear a lot say they're paying into Social Security, but they're never going to see it. And so because of that, push the financial benefit to their pocketbooks. How can you save them money? How can you increase their financial independence? Something like that. They're busy. Again, they're sandwiched. Email is the best marketing tool to reach this generation. So an email newsletter, email marketing, anything like that. However, if you need to tell them something, send them an email. They are more likely to buy or participate in something that is good for the environment or society, so add a cause to it. If you want them to come, make it contribute somehow, so that people bring canned goods or that people bring something for the animal shelter or something like that. Do some good cause that will get them there. And then the other thing is include their family. They're the ones who are not going to join because they want to be home with their family. So if they can bring their family, that's a bonus. And then they still are the generation who check the mail, who read through the mail. And so direct mail marketing works for them. Millennials are called soft-hearted and soft-shell. And so we value social issues over economics. We are the generation that we would rather earn less money at a job that we enjoy than more money at a job that we don't. We are the least frequent in-store shoppers, but if we do go in-store, we spend a lot of money. A big pull for millennials is ease of purchase. So how easily can I do this from my phone? And if I can do it easily, I'll probably buy it. If it takes, again, the silent generation, if it takes too many steps, I'm done. Another one that is big for this generation, as weird as it is free shipping. If they get to the end, they may fill their carts with stuff online, and they get to the end, they have $200 in their cart, but they have to pay $6.99 in shipping, they're just going to exit their cart out. But if you would have taken that $6.99 off and paid for free shipping, they won't do it, or they will do it. So their big thing is word of mouth or recommendations from family and friends. So get them, this is the generation that we see like check in on Facebook a lot, that they are somewhere. And then a lot of times it's because that business is saying, if you'll check in on your phone, I'll give you 10% off. A millennial's gonna do it. The other thing is if they have them post a picture and say like, this place is great. So you see a lot of food pictures, a lot of material things that they post pictures of. That's because the business is usually giving them incentive for doing that. And it's because we like to see what our friends like, and then we're more likely to try somewhere. Especially like new restaurants and that sort of stuff, we're not really gonna try until we've heard somebody else who's already been there say that it's good. And then we're willing to go do it. So again, show them pictures. They're review readers. They are gonna read if you are 3-star through 5-star, whatever it is. And then for them to reach them, radio advertisements are the best. And so we get 12 trillion emails a day, and so that's not really our thing, but radio advertisements work, and they like loyalty programs. So come to this thing 6 times and we'll give you this at the end of it. Or come to every class that we have or every meeting that we have and we'll put your name in a drawing for whatever. They like those extra incentives for being loyal. And then Gen Z, they're just digital. Everything they do is digital. They don't really want to talk to a person. If they don't have to, they will, but they don't want to. Their big thing is to highlight, again, that inclusivity of a program or a product. So letting everybody come, letting everybody be who they are is what matters to them. And then they like social media challenges because they use so many social media apps. They do not use Facebook. They're not as many are using Instagram. They're the ones who have switched to TikTok, Snapchat. There was a whole list of apps. I felt so old putting this part together. Because it was all these apps I've never even heard of. And it's all these apps that the younger generation is on because Facebook is their parents' thing or their grandparents' thing. And so they may have pages to keep in contact with some of those people, but they don't really use them. And then Gen Alpha, we don't know about. So what can we do as homemakers, and this will kind of wrap us up, to reach some of these generations? What can we do to get them to come to our groups?
To what?
To get people to join our group, to join homemakers. Because you can't do one thing that will just fit everybody across the board, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We are all so different in how we want to be reached. We can't just put it in the newspaper. So like, for example, we have the bazaar coming up. That's going to go on the radio, that's going to go in the newspaper, that's going to go on Facebook. It's going to go on community calendars because we are trying to reach an audience of more than one group, right? So what I really want you to do, and we don't have to do it today, but with your own group, really want you to figure out how can we target some of these groups and what do we need to be doing, because maybe our group is all boomers or our group is all silent, and what maybe is even outside of our comfort zone that we need to be doing to get these groups to join. Anybody have questions? All right, I will take your colored sheets back. And then again, if you want handouts of either of these for your groups, they are up here. But past that, we are done.